Good morning, and thank you all for coming to this seminar on how we can use natural user interfaces to develop brand advantage. Today I will talk about future advances which will radically change how people interact with digital devices and digital systems. My name is Torres. I am the Senior VP of Engineering at Synapse, which is a division of Cambridge Consultants, which is located on the west coast of the United States. I have worked for the last 20 years in the Bay Area integrating market viable technologies into products and systems. At Synapse, I lead our San Francisco office, and I work with our clients to create products and systems which are transformative to their businesses. So as I mentioned, that today we'll look at how we can create interfaces which will help to basically change the interaction that we have with digital devices, and we'll look at three main things. We'll look at what natural user interfaces are and talk about what impact they can have on our businesses, on our markets, on our brands. I'll look at how we can integrate voice and technologies like machine vision in order to make more compelling interfaces to these devices and systems. And then finally, we'll look at how you and we can drive development of the next wave of smart devices which have very compelling interfaces to really drive adoption. So does anyone know what a natural user interface is? I talk about this a lot. But I too have had to, I think it's a brilliant term, but it's not always obvious, even though it's called natural to everyone, about what it is. Does anyone have a thought about what it is? And don't worry, I won't pull you up on stage if you raise your hand. I'm kind of curious about what people think or already know about it. So I'll give you a hint. I'll start off by giving you a hint. This is not a natural user interface, right? So on the way up here, I was actually, my pilot was showing me the cockpit. I was with my daughter, so obviously when you're traveling with a young kid, they like to pull them up to the front. And he jokingly said, "Oh, we were admiring all of the switches and knobs," and he jokingly said, "Oh, I don't even know what all of these things do." And I laughed just to be polite, but I also, made me a little bit worried. And my daughter thought it was funny. But this is the kind of interface that it can take a lifetime to learn, and you have to be an expert. In a lot of ways, the systems that we are creating now are becoming more complex in the same way airplanes are, but we want to be able to access them and use them. Every day people want to be able to access and use them. So this is really what my team and my group, this company, we're looking at. We have all these complex systems, all these complex technologies that we're trying to create, but how do we make it simple for the user? So, you'll hear a lot of our speakers talk about, let's focus on the user. Our last keynote speaker was talking about, let's not lose sight of the user, and this is what's really important in the work that we do. And this is why I really appreciate and really fascinated by this idea of natural user interfaces. So Bill Buxton, I don't know if any of you know who Bill Buxton is, but he was an HCI, human-computer interface pioneer. And one of the things he said was, natural user interfaces exploit the skills that we have acquired through our lifetime of living on the world. I like this point because it's really saying natural user interfaces have to be intuitive, right? They have to use basic, common human skills. And we're not spending our lifetime learning how to use the interfaces are taking the experience that we have and really leveraging them. And in this way, we're able to see that they become more compelling. We can be experts immediately in how we use these interfaces, and then how we learn to use these interfaces become incremental. It's not, I have to go and do a workshop or I have to get an advanced degree. I can actually slowly learn as I'm using it. So when I was working on the iPad, I had just had my daughter, and so she was pretty young. And when she was about 8 months old, I was curious to see how she would interact with the iPad. Could she do things on it? And she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, but she could use the iPad, and certainly she couldn't send me an email. But when I put it in front of her, she could move around shapes, and she was interested in it. And to me, that's what's really powerful about these kinds of interfaces, right? And that's a product that can be used, this touch can be used not just by her, but also by the pilot. So I know one of the use cases that we had talked about when I was at Apple was how it was transforming the way pilots were using information. They used to have to carry these big briefcases in order to have all of the maps they needed in order to get from one destination to the next. And now it was transforming that into just having one small iPad, right? And so that's what I find really interesting. So it's an important part of where we believe technology and interface is going. So we can have complex systems, but really simple interfaces, because what we really care about is what is the user experience, right? Additionally, the other importance of natural user interfaces is really about cognitive load. So if you can have something that is easy to use and easy to access, then we don't have to think about how we're interacting. We can actually use that extra brain power to make more high-level decisions. And so we talked about this. If you're trying to figure out which lever to pull in a crisis situation, that's really difficult. But if all you have to do is, say, stop this alarm or move your hand down, that's really easy. You know how to do that just within your body. You don't have to be taught that. And this is the other interesting part about natural user interfaces. The last thing I want to say about natural user interfaces is really that context really matters. So, we can see that voice and touch and gestures are good areas to look at in terms of building natural user interfaces, but context in terms of design really matters. So, when I'm at my house, I can fling my arms wildly around to control a computer system, like a gaming system. That's fine, that's great. That's a great way to use my natural abilities to control a system. But I might not want to naturally fling my arms around in an office setting. That's awkward. So while looking at gestures is inherently a natural interface, knowing that the interaction that people have in certain settings might not actually make it comfortable might not make it comfortable, it might actually be awkward to them. With this in mind, let's get a little bit deeper into what makes natural user interfaces so compelling. As I said, systems are becoming more complex. We have more data, we have more integration, we have more capacity. We need to be able to control and command these systems in a more abstract and intuitive way. Natural user interfaces afford us better accessibility in a lot of ways. We don't have to have certain knowledge, we don't have to have necessarily certain capabilities or understanding. We can look at, again, basic human skills in order to be able to operate these more complex systems. Let's talk about a couple of products which I think really illustrate the power of using natural user interfaces very well. So I'll start by asking you guys, and this is a kind of an easy question. So I think you guys can answer this one. How many of you have phones with you right now? Okay, 100%, right? And so that's not a surprise, but previously BlackBerrys dominated the market, and the only people who really had them were people like you and me, who were business people who had to be on the phone all the time. But the next question I have is, well, if you think about your extended family, what percentage of your extended family has a phone, a smartphone? My guess is 100%. Is that? pretty close. For anyone over 12, I mean, maybe even 10 at this point, right? And so this is what's so interesting, because the multi-touch on the phone made it so that it was much more compelling for people to have these devices. It reached a lot more people. It became, people wanted it. It reached this level of accessibility that a lot of people wanted to embrace this technology, and you see a lot of this proliferation. Now, granted, that was 10 years ago. There have been a lot of other advances in phones, but I would say being able to manipulate the data directly, being able to intuitively know how to use these phones without having a bunch of buttons, without having to pull out a user manual, is part of the reason why they're so ubiquitous. Right. Let's go to another example, which I really love. And this has been an example of a natural user interface that we have looked at and talked about a lot, because again, it is also ubiquitous. How many people here have a smart speaker in their home? Yeah. And I like this example because when smart speakers first came out, I really didn't, and I've said this before, I tell other people I didn't really want one in my house. I didn't know what use I would have for it. I couldn't imagine talking to this device. But now I have a smart speaker in almost every room in my house. It's connected to my lights, my speakers, my garage door, my stereo system, lots of different things. And it's really been something that's been really integrated into how I do almost anything in my house. And the other part of it is, when I talk about accessibility, this is something that my daughter, who is 6, can also access all of the computing and the devices that we have in our place without having to pull open a screen. And same thing for myself. I really try to think about how much time I am spending on my devices, especially at home, to really take advantage of the human interactions that I have, but still be able to use the power of the systems that I have set up in my house. And so this is the part that I really appreciate about smart speakers. I talk to my smart speaker in my home. I do not talk to my Siri. It's very awkward. I never really liked it, because when you use it, there's so much noise, there are other people around, it would never really get what I was saying, or it would mess up, or do something different than I wanted it to do. But in my home, I don't mind talking to myself, and I don't mind talking to devices, and then it learns me a lot better. And so this is what I mean by context is important in terms of design for these natural user interfaces. You can have gestures, you can have voice, you can have touch, but you have to do it in a way that is in the right context for where you want to apply it. These are devices that I think really highlight very well what the real pull is for natural user interfaces. The one last idea that I want to talk about is this idea of craveable in terms of creating products and systems. Craveable is a term that the industrial designer that I was working with when I was working on the first Google phone, that they would use about, when we were designing and creating this product. And they were using it in a way to talk about, we want it to be so beautiful that the user is just going to want it. But I've carried that word with me in my career to think about really more about the user and how you can have, if you get the right experience, if you understand how the user will want to use it, that these natural user interfaces can really create products and systems that people will want to use, and they're very compelling in a way that they might not even know why. They just need or want to have it. And that's about making that very human, very basic, very natural connection. It's so easy to use. And I think this is also part of why I have so many of these devices in my home, because I had it in one room, and then I realized I was in another room, and I wanted to have the same functionality. I wanted to have that same interaction, that same way of connecting to the systems that I had created in my house. So that idea of craveable is really important in this particular context. Smart speakers, I think we've all used them, we've seen them. I think there are ways in which we can improve. I think I definitely have had some frustrations around my interactions with these smart speakers, and so one of the things that my team has been looking at is how can we, and we've been developing, is how can we make these smart speakers even more compelling, right? What's the next wave? Where can these speakers go? What can we do next with them? And so what we find is when you start to have natural user interfaces, there's a heightened sense of that human interaction, and so your expectation increases, right? So you're speaking to it and you think it should understand you like a human understands you, but it doesn't, because we're still working on that natural language processing. And as you heard from Tim, that it's increasing, but it's still at an 8th grade level, and there are still challenges that these systems have to really hearing and understanding what you're trying to ask it for. So, this is a chance for us to look at what are different technologies that we can bring in to these systems to make them even more compelling, and then bring the next wave of these smart devices. And I think there are a lot of technologies we can look at. I'm going to keep it simple for today, but I'd love to hear any other ideas. But I'll walk through machine vision. And what are things around machine vision, like gaze tracking, facial recognition, sentiment analysis, all of these sensors that are available, and then technologies you can develop by enhancing with deep learning, AI, software programming, in order to integrate them into systems that can do, improve these interactions. So, for example, on these smart speakers, what if instead of having to look at it and know a wake word, you can gaze at it and it would wake on gaze? Or if you wanted to turn on a light, instead of remembering that you designated your living room light 1, you just point to that light and lift up your hands. Or it can also see who, kind of identify different aspects of the room that you may be pointing to, and either shine a light there, or if you're looking out a window, understand that maybe you want to learn something about the outside, like the weather. Or it understands, other things that you're touching, like, or lifting your hands up and making different gestures to turn up the volume. So these are different contexts and interactions that we are looking at. Other ones are around going from looking at just a specific device to now making smart home systems. So now you're really interacting with a smart environment. And smart environments, I think, is really the way we're starting to go, because then we're not talking specifically to a device. We're really just interacting naturally in the environments that we know and we understand. So this is an example of what if you can identify every single member in the family, and then again, I go back to playing music because that's the piece of it that I really enjoy and appreciate. But it can play different music depending on who's in the room. It can also look at the mood or the sentiment of each of the individuals, and then decide, what kind of music. Are they in a festive mood and play dance music, or are they a little bit more mellow and play some jazz, something like that. And then beyond this, if we move past the home, what about other environments like smart office environments, right? So one of the most frustrating things I have in my office is really going into a conference room and trying to work all of the different pieces of equipment. But if you could have smart systems, voice, and machine vision, then maybe you can just point to a whiteboard, and the camera would look at the whiteboard or zoom into the whiteboard. It would be able to know who's talking. It would be able to take notes and attribute different notes to certain people who are talking. When you came in and it recognized you, it would set up the room in your specific settings. So, these are all ways that we can start to think about how we can make our environments much smarter. And then outside of our everyday work and home environments, then I think that there are other areas like specialized industries where these can also be used. So in heavy industry and in medical devices, like I said before, you can use natural user interfaces to reduce cognitive load. So if you're not thinking about how to interface with these more complex systems, you can use that extra brain power to actually do the high level work that you're trying to accomplish. This next section is really talking about how do you integrate these systems? How do you make natural user interfaces? And it talks a little bit about what we were talking about, but more specifically, I'm looking at what are the current technologies that are out there, like integrating voice command and trying to think about what are some of the challenges we are working through and addressing with our clients, and then also what are ways that we can enhance these things. So I'll say very quickly that I think that there are particular ways in which you can integrate voice, right? And the two on this side are really the integrate with systems that are already out there, Alexa and Google Home. But on the left side, we talk about being able to establish your own private networks or to embed the voice command within the system itself as a way to address a couple of issues that we've seen and that our clients have brought up. And one of them specifically is around security, right? So we talk about all of these things. When we talk about voice and listening within your home, or we're talking about facial recognition and other machine vision. Security is very important to understand, right? And it's also a very important thing to address with our clients and potentially users, because people don't want to feel like they're up in the cloud, or that people are taking their data, or that our customers don't want to feel like they're not in control of the data that they're collecting from their clients, and to be able to say to them that we know exactly how this is being used, or we're caring for your information that you've allowed us to use and help. So that's an important aspect of it, and this is why we're looking at and using more of the integration systems on the right side. In addition, we're also looking at we're also addressing issues around brand. If you're Sony and you're creating a smart device, you don't want to be having your customers say Alexa or Google, in order to interact with the device that you want to make. You want it to be more specific to the product that you're creating. And then, the last thing is talking about this understanding or this reliability. How do you get these systems? How do you get these voice systems to be more reliable? And of course, we can wait for natural language processing to improve, but at the same time, we can start to look at other technologies which can enhance voice. And like I said before, in this particular conversation, I really want to look at machine vision just as an example. These examples that I have in this particular presentation are ones that you can see in the demo that we have. We have a simplifying human experience demo, which you should see. My colleague Nate is running it, and he's brilliant. Very smart technologist who's been able to integrate a lot of these systems to talk about how can we make a smart room environment. And so I'll just touch really quickly on these. So with machine vision, we're able to combine cameras and AI in order to identify different people within a room, and track different points within a face to really talk about sentiment analysis and to understand what someone might be feeling, which is an interesting addition to voice. Additionally, we can look at identifying and classifying different objects like fruit, or identifying different objects which may be on a stove, right? So in this way, you might be able to say, point to a burner and say, turn on the burner, and be across the room preparing some other stuff, but it would be able to identify which of the burners you're talking about because there's something on it. And then again, gesture recognition and movement. Again, if there's something that you don't want to touch, maybe in the heavy industrial setting, or maybe just in your home, you can just move your hand in front of an object, and it might turn on the water or pull up some information that you may be looking at. So all of these different technologies are ones that we've been trying to push internally to really see and integrate with our clients, these technologies to enhance some of the interfaces that we've been creating. The last piece of this, and when we talk about the different technologies that are becoming available and becoming really market ready, I'll just mention these two aspects. So these two drivers really around mobile devices and automated vehicles are really helping to drive why these systems are much more readily available. So we have computational systems which are getting smaller and cheaper and more capable, and sensor systems like cameras and LiDAR, radar systems. So all of these sensors are also becoming much more available, much less expensive, and they're becoming ready for production and getting into market. All of that said, they're much more available. Now we have to actually do the work, right? We actually have to use these systems and create the software, the AI, the deep learning in combination with the products that we're trying to create really these interfaces that are really compelling. And this is the part of the pull that we are starting to do with some of the interfaces that we're creating. I think there's three main things that we need to think about when we're talking about how do we develop these things, right? And so really quickly, technology life cycle, I think that there are three main parts to technology life cycle. There's the creation. Creation is really on this cutting edge. It can take 5 to 20 years in order to get new technologies out there. It can take a long time, but that's really what we're doing in our in research facilities, universities, and then there's productization. So when we talk about technologies that are ready, starting to be ready for commercialization, this is the start of taking those technologies and pulling them through this productization cycle so that we can actually bring them into full production. And then the last piece is really around commercialization. So commercialization is when, obviously the technology has been commoditized. We know exactly how it's going to work. We can package it in a system, and they're pretty straightforward to use. For myself and a lot of my colleagues, this productization piece is really the sweet spot of the work that we do. It's when technologies are starting to come out of the R&D phase, and we know that we can, in a couple years, Eric was talking about 18 to 24 months when these products are going to be ready to hit the marketplace or hit into production. So this is for us in this organization. This is really the sweet spot of the work that we do. And I'm just curious if anyone here is a surfer. I'm on the West Coast, so we talk about surfing all the time. I think surfing is a great metaphor for this technology life cycle. So if you're in the creation phase, you can take off too early. You can think of this technology as being ready to integrate, but what can happen is you're too far in front of the wave, and you will get smashed by the big volume of all the work that you need to do in order to get this technology out to market, and then you'll just be inundated with all of this other work, and you won't actually be able to get out to market to make a good product. If you are too late, you're behind the wave, and you see all of your competitors going. And if you're just going to wait until a product or technology is ready and it's already commercialized, then you're going to see everyone else kind of pulling away from you in this wave. And so when I say being in the sweet spot is this productization wave. So you're taking some risks. You're trying to get right before that wave is about to break right on top of you, and you're trying to get into this wave, and that's what we talk about, this sweet spot, like riding this wave and knowing exactly when is the right time for a technology to get developed. I talk about building the right team. Building the right team in these types of developments is really important because you're trying to integrate technology into a product. that might not be something that you've used before. And also user interface is incredibly important. So you need technologists who appreciate the challenges to create a product. You need user interface designers who appreciate the technology. You need engineers who can get deep and understand the technology in order to bring the utility of that technology to full fruition. And then you need manufacturers who appreciate both the user experience as well as the technology in order to be able to shepherd that into full production. So in a lot of ways, successful product that incorporates leading edge technologies need these kinds of teams, and these are the kinds of teams that I work with, that I like to build in order to successfully bring these types of cutting edge products to market. And then finally, you need to manage risk throughout the development process. And Richard touched on this in his speech, that when you're trying to do something that's truly innovative, there is risk to it, right? You don't know if it's not clear. The path is not clear. You're not just trying to put technology that's already been baked into your product. You are trying to create new technology and make a great product and have it be compelling. And all of these things need to come together. So when I talk about managing risk, it's important to have the right team who can identify the different aspects of risk early on, so that throughout the process you can hit each of those risks and do it in a timely manner, so that you're not, you don't get behind this wave, or you don't get too far in front of this wave. And you're looking at early on, does this have market viability? Does this have manufacturing feasibility? Can I get this technology to have true utility and serve a real user need? And so these are the kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself if you're trying to create user experiences that will be compelling in the future. And I think this is where we're going to go. So just to wrap up, I think continuing on this surfer theme, what's next for natural user interfaces, and what will things look like in the next 10 years? I'll finish up with this quote that Bill Gates said, which is, until now we've always had to adapt to the limits of technology and conform to the way we work with computers. With natural user interface, for the first time, humans will be able to use technology in whatever way is the most comfortable and the most natural for us. He actually said this about 10 years ago. And I say this because we've seen some really great examples of how natural user interfaces can really affect and dominate product markets and improve brands. But I think we're still at the tip of it. There's still so much more that we can do, and it's still a very important area for us to look at, because, as I said before, our systems are getting much more complex. We're pulling a lot of data and integration together. And so when we do that, we need to be even more hyper-focused on what is the experience that we're trying to deliver to people. So I'll just say in conclusion, I'm hoping that you all have gotten a lot out of this talk. I really appreciate all of the participation, and I just want you to go away remembering, think about the user experience, and don't forget about the context in which you're trying to build these systems. Think about the ways in which you can integrate new technologies, and always think, is this a technology that I can integrate within my product, so that you don't get too far in front of that wave and get washed out because you're trying to develop a technology that's too leading edge. And then finally, always keep your eye on the horizon and look at what new technologies are coming, because that will help you look at your roadmaps and also identify ones that are actually ready to be used. So with that, I will thank you guys, and thanks again.